Go. All right, good. All right, great. Well, I think we're almost back on time now to get started. What we'd love to do now is just kind of get a debrief of these breakout sessions. I think those breakout sessions, I heard from a few, were very informative, very interesting, and a lot of people have made a lot of meaningful connections. So now for the next 20 minutes, I think we got 20 minutes before our final panel comes up, is we want to hear the key learnings from the breakout sessions. I know Adrian is one of the breakout sessions leader. He's here. Who are the other two breakout sessions leader? All right, so we got Nong. Nong. Okay, and which breakout session did you lead?
AAPI Women.
AAPI Women, great, Nong. And who's the third breakout leader do we have? In room 285 about career development. Who was in that session? Anybody was to say? Who wants to volunteer to summarize that? Look at You sure you don't want to do it? Here's a chance to do some stand-up summaries. No? All right. That's our leader. Is that the leader that is coming in? Are you going to do the breakout session? Not?
The breakout session B.
Okay.
The spokesperson is coming.
See, all these opportunities to lead. Yeah. Okay, all these opportunities to lead and people passing.
Ellen is the one.
Ellen? Okay. Alan. All right, good, Alan. One of the things I heard in this breakout session with ERGs, right, is that if you know about ERGs, and someone made a great comment, I think it was Vance that made this great comment, right, because he's been in ERGs for a long time at HSBC. Part of the ERGs holding events, right, we do events in ERGs, is not just about the event itself, but it's about who is going to help volunteer for the event and who is going to be a leader, right, to take on to run that event. It's a great point. They're not doing the ERGs just for events. They're doing to see who are the Asian American and other minority leaders that can step up. How many of you want to be like a senior leader in the company, right? Raise your hand if you care to be a senior leader. Okay, a lot of you. I'll just tell you one thing. There's no chances that a senior executive is going to make you a senior leader without having seen you in action. And one of the things that I'll tell you my personal experience, I got a chance to be a senior leader at GE because they saw me lead the ERG group and run an event for 800 people, right? And we had to do it on our own creative. There's no playbook. So a great opportunity at ERG is for your senior leaders to show your leadership skills. A lot of people say, I want to be a manager, but I never get the opportunity. Well, the best way to become a manager and a leader is by being a leader in some other thing, in a safe environment like an ERG, and then all of a sudden, your senior executive says, wow, this is a person that can lead a group of volunteers and run a great event. And then they might take a chance on you. So, big part of Vance, thank you for that note on the ERGs. All right, so with that, Adrian, do you want to come up and talk about the summary of the breakout group? Yeah, why don't you come up here? Put pressure on you.
Feels like normal. Thanks, Michael. So we were in breakout A. We were in this room. Really fantastic conversation. We talked about so many things. I've made some notes to make sure I try to hit them. But those in the group, if I miss something, please just cut me off and jump in. And I know, Michael, you set up the session as being around combating anti-Asian hate. It's not that that topic is not important, but the discussion was so robust that we actually didn't even get there. We were already jumping in. But the first thing that I noticed was just the diversity of the people that were in our group. Like, there was representation from most of the big banks. I will say Morgan Stanley outnumbered every other bank at this event. Sorry, Goldman. Sorry, JP Morgan. Is that the MS table back there? But also from life sciences, from professional services, from consumer goods, just a really strong diversity of industries, and also a strong diversity of people and how involved in their ERG they've been. I think there was someone in our group who's been part of their ERG for 20 plus years, which was incredible to me. McKinsey's has only been around for 10 years, and then people that are brand new to the space as well. The first thing we talked about was the mission of ERGs and how to measure the progress and engagement of members. And one thing that we discussed was, where an ERG typically starts is with the building connectivity and community and a lot of the parties, and then expanding beyond that and going into the professional development. And there's a comment about One of the challenges that a lot of Asians facing is public speaking and like targeted programming around those sorts of things that we know are valuable to members. And then later in the conversation, we went even beyond that and said, once an ERG is really mature, it can actually start to shift the mission of an organization and the actual business of it, right? I think about organizations where, Asian representation in their marketing or in the way that they test their products or develop their products, the ERGs are often the ones that are informing that process. Another thing that we talked about was how ERG events are planned when a lot of their members are serving in a volunteer capacity. And we had a really, really rich conversation around the balance that you have to strike between kind of giving people kind of the instructions or the playbook to like run a really, really good event, but also giving the freedom for people to kind of grow into that role. And what is the role of an ERG to actually provide active professional development for their members through the act of actually just leading the ERG, and how do we strike that balance? Anything I missed, those that were in this group? Feels like we talked about like 35 different things, so. Did I cover it? Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nong Wen. Go by she, her. If you're visually impaired, I'm an Asian woman wearing a blue blazer. So thank you for letting me represent our group. So John Wang and I facilitated a very exciting and very dynamic conversation. We had a very engaged audience, and 1 hour was just not enough. We just barely scratched the surface, and our topic was on AAPI women in the workplace. So for those of you here, raise your hands if you've heard of the Asian glass ceiling, or some might call it the bamboo ceiling, right? If you're a woman, there's another ceiling, so it's called the double glass ceiling, right? So are you all familiar with that? Yes, raise your hand. Yes, for Asian women? There are enough studies that show, and there's so much data that show that Asian women among all race cohorts need a lot of support, right? Especially in executive representation and advancement. So our group talked about some of the challenges, right? One being leadership prototype. Leadership prototype in corporate sometimes is not in sync with the cultural values and our upbringing, right? As Asian Americans, especially if you're an Asian woman, you're expected to be demure, you're expected to be, very quiet, speak when spoken to. Depends on some households. In my household, I was really loud. I did not fit I'm sure it was disappointing for my parents, but that was the expectation, and it's very anchored in culture, right? Across, especially East Asian, Southeast Asian culture. So we talked about how these prototypes are changing, but we need to have more Asian female leaders and role models that we can look to. And that's why, I always refer to the glass ceiling and not the bamboo ceiling, because glass is see-through. You have to see it to be it. And for Asian women, we need to be, leaders so that future generations can see the possibilities, right? We also talked about code switching, covering, being our authentic selves. It's like bringing, being comfortable so that we all know that when we are comfortable being ourselves, we perform better. So there is a business imperative to that. We talked about stereotypes and biases, whether they're unconscious or otherwise. But for Asian female, I mentioned this earlier, the stereotype is to be, quiet, to be presentable, to be a little package. And once you speak out, then maybe, and then if you're speaking out too much, and if you're too loud, then you might be seen as a dragon lady. So there are these stereotypes that actually harm women from advancing in the workplace, right? So it's just something that we need to be conscious of, especially if we're people managers. We also talked about traits. We had some examples of best practices where, one company looked at the highest performing professionals and leaders. So there are 10, 15 Asian female leaders that they saw. So they studied what the traits were for these leaders, and they actually developed talent pipeline around these traits. So that's something that I'd love to dig further, because I think that's a good practice, a good best practice. The other thing that we pointed out was that soft skills are very important. It's the communication skills, right? It's how we show up, the executive presence. And it's, not, so despite being, you could be the best orator, but if the stereotypes are working against you, that's something that we need others to keep in mind, right? Because you could have really good technical skills and hard skills, and you can have really good soft skills. But when it comes to promotions and advancement, you can get overlooked. There's a book by Margaret Chan called Stuck, and it's really good. She was talking about a group of Harvard alum, and she was one of them. Went to one of these events years later, 20 years later, and they looked around the room. There were no Asian leaders, even though they all had the same training. And so there's something systemic maybe about the lack of Asian representation, especially female representation. We also talked about allyship. Someone brought up earlier, it's being an accomplice and not an ally. That's the more active form. Or label for someone who will speak up for you, right? I know in the room that we were in, there were 3 males. John Wang did not have a choice. Actually, he did have a choice. He joined us as a co-facilitator, but we had 2 others. But we'd like to see more allies, because I know in my career, I've had a long career in international development. Every time I went to a gender conference, it was mainly women. And we know our issues. We understand, what we need to change, or what needs to be changed in order for us to advance. It's the people who are outside our echo chamber who need to be more sensitized to the issues that we face. So we talked about talent development versus talent advancement. So talent development mainly for women, but when it comes to talent advancement, more targeted at men, right? So the latter, we know, talent advancement is more strategic. So we need to change that. And I'll leave you with a conversation we had about patriarchy, right? And I'll quote John, who said it very aptly, "Men made the rules, and men won't let go of the rules and, rock the boat, because John says men are insecure." I thought that was, it was really telling. And I want to leave you with a closing thought that Tina raised, and I do agree, that we need to have more spaces like this. We need to have spaces to talk about some of these issues and challenges, because the more we do it, the more we normalize this, and ERGs are the best vehicle to share this kind of information, to share the research, the data, but in your workplace, it is a vehicle also that gives you the space to talk about these sensitive issues, right? And to talk to your managers about what you want in your careers, right? So you might have to have these hard conversations, but DEI provides the vehicle for that, and the ERGs are just the perfect resource for those kinds of conversations. Thank you.
Alrighty. I have the privilege to present for Group B, I think it was. So I had the opportunity to present with Lucy. So Group B, please give Lucy a round of applause. She really led the conversation today, and she's amazing. So I'll tell you, our group had about 20 people. We were represented about 8 different companies, all unique companies. I will say we were heavily represented from Bank of America, from the bank. So shout out to my fellow Bank of America teammates. I would say we had 3 categories of learnings throughout the session. Our session was titled the development and engagement of ERGs, the value of development engagement for ERGs. The first category I would say is learnings, and I think the learnings that we had were more so around the alignment of ERGs as their role in the overall D&I infrastructure, meaning that one of the biggest moments was just making sure that your ERG goals aren't just to network, aren't just to have events, but they should be aligned to some type of D&I goal across the organization, because at the end of the day, that's a company's typical mission within D&I, and the ERGs will support that. You'll typically get a lot more support from the top of the house if it's aligned with a strategic goal that you have for the company. The second is, the category was benefits, and I'll say these are things that our ERGs do well. One of the things we talked a lot about was career mobility and networking and exposure to senior leaders across the company. So typically, you get a lot of exposure within an ERG that you don't typically get exposure within your own line of business. And the line of business typically doesn't have a means to give that type of exposure to the broader group within that organization. So an ERG is a great vehicle in order to have that ability to network and get exposure across different line of businesses and meet senior leaders. I think one of the things that we emphasized was not only in our chat, but it was a safe space for us to have a discussion. I think that was mentioned in the last update as well. But ERGs are a great way to have a safe space for conversations. That way folks feel like they do belong. And the third thing I would say is more emerging, which is leveraging the ERGs as a way to drive the bottom line. We had a story about how one of our ERG leaders was connected to an organization, and we were pitching that organization. At the end of the day, we had connections to 4 different line of businesses to that organization through the person's nonprofit affiliation because of their work within the ERG. And at the end of the day, there was several businesses that were interested in doing more business with that organization and potentially win a significant amount through the connection of the ERG. The third thing that we talked about, I would say the third category that is more so on challenges. And I think there was discussions on PI a little bit earlier today that I unfortunately missed, but there was talk about prioritizing the opportunities that an ERG provides. And sometimes your 9-to-5 job takes a lot of time, and ensuring that we do prioritize some of those opportunities that the ERGs give in order to make sure you are participating in every piece of the pie. So those are the 3, I would say, categories that we covered. Lucy or anyone else in the group, is there anything that I missed? All right, that's it for me. Thank you.
I want to add one thing just because it's so important. So at the end, we had really good conversation. At the end, I just asked the group, I said, is there one wish, right, from today learning? And one of us in the room, when you look at the person, it's a white man, white young professional man with a lot of good looking and everything, right? The message is, don't judge me just because I look like this. I also have a difficult beginning, moving from another country to this country. right? So we all learn just because we all look certain way. Do not predispose. Get to know the person, get to understand before we make judgment, because he certainly doesn't feel he's privileged. So I thought that's important to share. Okay?